Hey everyone, in this tutorial we're going to see how to query a GraphQL API using Vue.js. So most commonly you'll probably see online people are querying their GraphQL APIs using GraphQL, which is a great prototyping interface, but it's not really suitable for production because you're not going to ask somebody to use GraphQL and only GraphQL. You're probably going to ask them to use their own client-facing front-end applications. What I'm going to do in this tutorial is I'm going to be using Axios with Vue.js. There are hundreds of different ways to query for GraphQL APIs, and I'm sure I'm going to receive a lot of comments on this as well. But Axios works and it'll solve our problems for this particular use case. A prerequisite of this particular tutorial is one, you do have to have Vue.js available, so the Vue.js CLI. The second one is you do have to have a GraphQL API to test around with. So if you watched one of my previous videos, I did show how to create an API. I also do have a video course as well as ebook available. It's called Web Services for the JavaScript Developer, which will show you how to create a GraphQL API among other things. But again, you do need that API available. What we're doing in this tutorial is just the client-facing front end. And as you can see, I do have GraphQL up, but it won't be the core focus of this particular tutorial. So going into a new tab, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. I'm going to say Vue, create, I'll say GraphQL example project. Doesn't really matter what you call it. This is just the project name. Let's go ahead and choose the defaults. After the project's created, what we'll want to do is we'll want to navigate into it. And then we want to install Axios. So I did demonstrate Axios in a previous tutorial just around generic HTTP requests. It's going to be the same concept, but we'll revisit it. I do recommend that you visit my previous tutorial as well, just as a refresher. But we'll say npm install Axios -- save. So with that installed, now we're ready to start coding. So I'm going to open it up in a text editor. I'm going to be using Atom by GitHub. Doesn't really matter what you use, as long as it can edit HTML and JavaScript code. So go ahead and open up your source directory, and then we're going to go into components. You can go ahead and create a new component if you wanted. We're just going to do everything inside the Hello World component, and I'm going to clean it up a bit. So I'm going to wipe out a lot of this HTML template. I'm also going to wipe out this style information because it's not really relevant for this example. And finally, I'm going to just clean up the tabs a little bit, so that way it conforms better with my editor settings. All right. So with that done, the first step is we want to import Axios because we just downloaded it. So inside the script, we can say import Axios from Axios. So that's good and done. We can also remove the properties because we won't be using them in this particular example. But what we might want to do is we might want to define some data. So we're going to say data, and for that we're going to say return, and we're going to say people. So we have the opportunity to work with people. This is going to be an array. This is going to match what you saw in GraphQL at the beginning of this tutorial. In addition, in addition to data, we're also going to have a mounted function. So this is part of Vue's lifecycle events. So this will trigger after the Vue has mounted. So before we get too involved here, actually, let's go into the app Vue file because we did remove the properties. It's a good idea to update it. So for one, it's still called Hello World. We just don't have a message property. If we wanted to, let's go ahead and wipe out this image as well. So that way the Hello World is kind of the star. And we can test that by going into our terminal and saying npm run serve. And then we'll check it out in our web browser. So let's go in the web browser. I'm going to open up a new tab. I'm going to say localhost 8080. And as you can see, there's nothing there. And I can open up the logs. It says workbox stuff from a previous application, but for the most part, everything is golden. Everything is good to go. So let's go ahead and close this out. We're going to go back into our code, and we're going to actually start working with Axios. So we're going to go to Hello World view. Inside the mounted, what we're going to do is, so Axios allows us to work with promises, but I personally am not a huge fan of promises. So we're actually going to use async and await. And we could do that by just saying async in front of mount, which should actually be called mounted. Mount is not a lifecycle hook, but mounted is. And with that, then we can just use await inside of this particular function. So for example, first of all, let's do a try so that way we can catch any errors. And if there's an error, we can say console.error and just print that out. Now, if there's no error, what we want to do is we want to say var result equals await, because this is where the promise is. We're going to say Axios. And we're going to define some settings for Axios. So for example, Axios, we want to specify the method. We want to specify that this is going to be a post request. We want to specify the URL. So my URL is HTTP localhost port 3000. This is the URL of my GraphQL API, not my Vue.js application. And it's GraphQL. So this is where the things really matter here for this particular example. We want to say data. So this is going to be our post body. We want to specify that data is going to include a query. And query is going to be a string. But instead of typing out some long, nasty string in one line, we're going to do a multi-line string with the backtick character. So that way we can have a little bit of cleanliness to our code. So this is going to be our actual GraphQL query. So for example, people, we can get the ID, we can get the first name, we can get the last name. And this again is a GraphQL query that we set up in a previous example. But it should get people and it should get this information. It should be an array. Once we have that, once we have the result, we need to populate it in people, because that's what we're going to render on the screen. So what we can say is we can say this.people equals result.data. I know that's weird. And we'll validate this in a second. .people. And save it. So we have our data potentially, but we're not rendering it yet. So we can go into our template on up near line 2, and we can say let's go ahead and make this an unordered list, and let's go ahead and loop through our array and print everything to the screen. So we can say li, we can say v4, so this is a loop, person in people being our array. And let's go ahead and new line this so that way it's a little easier to read. But we're going to say person.firstname. And we're going to say person.lastname. And if I really wanted to, I can say, you know what, let's go ahead and include the ID as well. Person.id, maybe separate it by a hyphen. Let's save it and let's see if it actually works. So we can go back into our web browser. Refresh here. Doesn't look like it did anything. Let's go ahead and inspect it, see if there's any errors. Cross-origin resource request sharing problem. So this has to do with my previous tutorial. So I'm going to fix it and then I'm going to fade away so that way we don't have to see what happened. I do have tutorials on fixing cores on back-end applications, but it's out of the scope of this example, so let me just fix it. So I fixed cores, and as you can see, well, we no longer have that particular error. Again, all of that other stuff in my console logs has to do with a previous project that I worked on. But you can see that it is printed out. It has weird styling. I can go ahead and fix that. That has to do with our app view file. Let's go ahead and remove those styles so it's as vanilla as we can get. I'll save it. Go back to my web browser here, and there it is. It's showing. So if I wanted to, again, a feature of GraphQL, and this is where it's beneficial, is I can query for whatever I want, whenever I want. So I'm going to remove the ID, for example, so it's no longer going to exist as part of our results. And I can also remove the ID up there because it won't be in our result set anymore. So I save it, and there you go. So we just saw how to use Axios to issue some GraphQL queries. Again, there's many other ways. Everyone has their own opinion on what's the best way. I think this is pretty clean. It seems to work, and Axios works across many different frameworks, so it's a good option. It's not the only option, but it is a good option, and I personally like it.